On the first day I moved into the neighborhood, my neighbor took me to court. She tearfully accused my son of assaulting her daughter. My Daisy just turned 18, and she was ruined by that pervert Charlie. That rotten person, raised without proper upbringing, must be sentenced to death. Her daughter also insisted that it was my son who did it. Brother Charlie said if I didn't take off my clothes, he would strangle me. I was so scared, sob sob. Upon hearing this, the jury and the audience were filled with righteous indignation, angrily demanding severe punishment for my son. Beast, this Charlie is simply a beast. Punish him severely, don't let this demon Charlie go. But when the judge summoned my son to appear in court, everyone present was stunned. Because my son was indeed a beast. Linda, your beastly son had the guts to ruin my daughter, so why doesn't he have the face to appear in court? Hiding him won't help, I won't let this matter rest. Your son must be sentenced to death, and you must compensate my daughter with $2 million in emotional damages. In the courtroom, my neighbor Karen glared at me viciously, as if she wanted to skin me alive. Her daughter Daisy cried pitifully, her eyes full of grievance and fear. I looked at the mother and daughter coldly and repeated the same words. My son did not assault Daisy, and it's impossible for him to have done so. Let justice be served where it's due, don't try to pin this false accusation on my son. Before today, I never expected to confront Karen and her daughter in court like this. On the day my son and I just moved into the neighborhood, Karen enthusiastically helped me carry my luggage, saying that we were neighbors now and to feel free to ask her for anything. During the conversation, when she heard I had a son, she smiled broadly and introduced her daughter Daisy, repeatedly calling it fate. However, that very evening, she brought a disheveled Daisy and frantically pounded on my door, accusing my son Charlie of assaulting Daisy. I was stunned at first, but after reacting, I quickly explained to her that my son would never do such a thing. But Karen wouldn't listen at all, insisting that it was my son who did it, and Daisy sobbed beside her, echoing that my son had blocked her in the hallway and dragged her to the rooftop to assault her. No matter how I explained, the mother and daughter clung to my son like jackals fixated on their prey. They even demanded $1 million in compensation and that my son marry Daisy grandly, or else they would call the police and ensure my son rotted in prison. I knew clearly that my son couldn't have assaulted Daisy, and this $1 million compensation was absurd, so I firmly rejected the mother and daughter's demands. Unexpectedly, they sued me in court. I firmly denied it, and Karen exploded immediately. Impossible? Linda, open your damn eyes and look at the injuries on Daisy. Karen pulled open Daisy's coat, revealing the shocking bruises on her body. These blue and purple marks were caused by your beastly son, my Daisy is only 18. Daisy trembled as she looked at me, her eyes teary. Aunt Linda, these were all done by Brother Charlie, he threatened to strangle me if I didn't take off my clothes. I was really scared. Karen held Daisy to comfort her, and the mother and daughter cried bitterly right in the courtroom. Yet I, the mother of the alleged perpetrator, watched coldly and indifferently. The jury and audience pointed at me and cursed. Shameless! Her own son did such a heinous thing, and she's still denying it. Clearly not a good person. If the upper beam is crooked, the lower one will be too. Poor Daisy, so young and facing this, it'll be a lifelong shadow. The critical voices bombarded me, but I didn't care, acting as if it had nothing to do with me. Daisy cried even harder. Aunt Linda, it was clearly Brother Charlie who did it, why won't you admit it? I'm only 18, how can I face people in the future? How can I go on living, sob sob? She cried while pounding her head, her despair making many present teary-eyed. Karen, heartbroken, pointed at my nose and cursed, Linda, you have a child too, how can you be so heartless? If your daughter was the victim today, could you still be so indifferent? I sneered, my son is being slandered, what's wrong with me defending him? I knew clearly that my son Charlie couldn't possibly do such an absurd thing. But in their eyes, I was just making excuses. The jury and audience's discussions grew louder. This woman is beyond redemption. To protect her son, she's even lost basic conscience. If the mother is so shameless, what good can the son be? The courtroom became chaotic instantly, the judge frowned and banged the gavel. Order. Since both sides hold their own views, please provide corresponding evidence. As soon as the words fell, Daisy's lawyer stood up immediately and stated righteously, "Your Honor, we have sufficient evidence to prove that the defendant Charlie assaulted my client Daisy." She signaled Daisy to recount the incident that night. Daisy took a deep breath and began describing the alleged events with a trembling voice. "That night at 10 o'clock, I was coming home from tutoring class, and the elevator in the building happened to be broken, so I had to climb the stairs. When I reached the 26th floor, someone suddenly covered my mouth from behind. I struggled desperately, but brother Charlie was very strong. He dragged me straight to the rooftop and threatened me to play with him." I raised an eyebrow and pressed, "How are you sure that person was my son Charlie?" Daisy met my gaze and choked out, Of course I know, I saw his face." Brother Charlie forced me to take off my clothes. I shook my head desperately in refusal, but he raised his hand and grabbed my neck, saying that if I didn't comply, he would strangle me. I was too scared, and helplessly, I had to submit, sob. At this point, she cried so hard she could barely breathe, clutching her clothes tightly. Everyone sympathized with her experience, but only I knew clearly that she was lying. I pointed it out publicly, "Daisy, you're lying." Upon hearing this, Daisy trembled all over and roared at me uncontrollably. "Lying? Aunt Linda, how could I lie about my own innocence? Why do you have to be so cruel to me? Look at the injuries on my body yourself, see how your son tortured me." She tore at her clothes like a madwoman, revealing more bruises of varying depths. Daisy's lawyer hugged the collapsing Daisy and sternly accused me, "Defendant, on what basis do you say my client is lying? The scars on Daisy's body are ironclad proof. Your baseless accusation is secondary harm to the victim." I looked coldly at the indignant lawyer and said word by word, "If she had really seen my son, she wouldn't say such absurd things. On the day my son and I moved, the mother and daughter only saw me. My son Charlie had never appeared in front of them from beginning to end. If they had ever seen my son, they would never pin the crime of assault on him." Upon hearing this, Daisy's lawyer scoffed, "Defendant, is your son some hot commodity? Why would my client Daisy go out of her way to slander him with her own innocence?" Daisy echoed, "I really have seen brother Charlie. When I was going to tutoring class, I happened to see him coming out of the house. We took the elevator down together, and he said his name was Charlie, the new neighbor." Karen pointed at my nose and screamed, "Linda, don't think you can get your son off by stirring up trouble here. Daisy saw your son with her own eyes and even knows his name, don't try to quibble." I watched the mother and daughter singing in harmony and found it laughable. Daisy spoke so confidently because the hallway and rooftop were surveillance blind spots. The mother and daughter exploited these blind spots to boldly fabricate lies. I didn't continue arguing with them but turned to the judge, "Your Honor, the plaintiff's testimony has many contradictions and doubts, which are insufficient to substantiate that my son Charlie committed the assault." Seeing the judge agree with my view, Karen became anxious. She jumped up from her chair and roared while pointing at my nose, "Contradictions? Doubts? Linda, stop confusing the issues here. Every word my daughter said is true, the injuries on her body are evidence." I laughed, "You want to convict my son based on just a few words? The law isn't something you can fool." Karen's face turned red with anger from my words, and Daisy nearly fainted from crying. The jury thought I was being unreasonable, and the criticisms grew louder. "This woman is simply unreasonable, even at this point," she's still arguing fallaciously. Why wasn't her child the one assaulted? If the mother is so despicable, the son is indeed a beast. They chimed in one after another, trying to force me to submit this way. But I straightened my back and coldly scanned the jury and audience. I mocked, "Everyone, the truth hasn't been determined yet, don't let yourselves be used as tools." They were choked by my words for a moment, then someone retorted, "Us being used? Clearly, your son did the bad deed and you're trying to quibble." "Exactly, how could a young girl like Daisy joke about something like this?" Seeing supporters, Karen gained more confidence. She glanced at me sinisterly, a flash of triumph in her eyes. Linda, you keep saying the evidence is insufficient. Now open your eyes wide and see clearly. I want to see how you'll quibble when the evidence is right in front of you. After saying that, she exchanged a look with the lawyer, who then took out a document and displayed it publicly. This document in my hand is proof of bodily fluids belonging to the defendant Charlie extracted from my client Daisy. These words exploded like thunder in the courtroom. Everyone's gaze focused on the so-called report, including mine. Daisy's lawyer held the document high, as if declaring victory. This report shows that in Ms. Daisy's intimate clothing and relevant body parts, DNA highly matching that of the defendant's son Charlie was detected. Linda, the evidence is irrefutable. What do you have to say now? I looked at the test report held high by the lawyer, without a trace of panic on my face. I didn't expect Karen to go this far, even forging evidence. I slowly stood up, my gaze sweeping over Karen and her daughter and their lawyer who thought victory was assured, my voice calm but carrying undeniable force. The report is fake. I don't believe it. Fake? Karen's lawyer laughed as if hearing the biggest joke, distributing copies of the report to the judge and jury. Linda, this report was issued by the city hospital, stamped with an official seal, and has legal validity. You say it's fake just like that? Daisy looked up at me, resentment emerging on her tear-streaked face. Aunt Linda, you don't accept my testimony, you don't accept the hospital's report. How can you be so shameless? Do you really have to drive me to death? As she spoke, she slammed her head against the table corner madly, the dull thuds echoing in the courtroom. Karen was terrified out of her wits, screaming as she rushed to hug her daughter. Daisy, don't do anything stupid. If something happens to you, how can I live? Seeing this, the judge quickly ordered someone to stop her, banging the gavel loudly. Plaintiff, control your emotions, don't engage in extreme behavior. In any case, the law will give you justice. With the judge's words, Daisy's state gradually stabilized. Karen held her daughter, staring at me with venomous eyes. Linda, if your son doesn't plead guilty today, I'll die right in front of you, and even as a ghost, I won't let you and your son go. The jury and audience echoed in agreement, wishing my son could be executed on the spot. I'm furious, that beast Charlie must get the death penalty. Look what he's done to this mother and daughter. The DNA matches and you still want to deny it? This Liu family is really shameless. The mother sheltering her beastly son should go to prison with him. Daisy's lawyer said righteously, Linda, the law won't let any bad person go. Your son Charlie must pay the due price for assaulting my client Daisy. Everyone was waiting for the judgment on my son and me. The judge cleared his throat and prepared to question me finally. Defendant Linda, regarding the DNA test report provided by the plaintiff and Ms. Daisy's testimony, do you have any other objections to state? I met the judge's gaze and answered word by word, clearly, Your Honor, my evidence is my son. I request to summon my son Charlie to testify in court. The judge's gavel fell, and the courtroom door slowly opened. Summon the defendant Charlie to court. Everyone's gaze focused on the door. Karen and her daughter stared intently, wishing to tear apart the beast who ruined Daisy on the spot. However, when my son walked into the courtroom, everyone present was stunned. Because my son was indeed a beast. What's going on? How can Charlie look like this? Isn't this a dog? A burst of exclamations erupted from the crowd, staring blankly at the golden retriever being led in. My son Charlie was indeed a golden retriever. It stuck out its tongue, wagged its tail left and right, curiously surveying everything in the courtroom, completely unaware that it had become the protagonist of this farce. I picked up the dog and placed it on the defendant's stand, saying playfully, Everyone, see clearly, this is my son Charlie, a 2-year-old golden retriever. Karen and Daisy widened their eyes, looking incredulously at the dog in my arms. Karen's lips trembled. No, this can't be. How can your son be a dog? I raised an eyebrow at her. My household registry has only this one son. I said my son is called Charlie, but I never said he was human. Daisy's face turned pale, and she began to collapse. She questioned me. Didn't you say your son is about my age? How could it be a dog? I laughed. A 2-year-old golden retriever is equivalent to 18 in human years. no problem. On moving day, when Karen inquired about my son, I casually mentioned my son is about the same age as your Daisy. Who would have thought the mother and daughter would use this to scheme against me and my son? Now, Karen and her daughter were struck as if by lightning. Daisy slumped directly in her chair. Daisy's lawyer was also dumbfounded, and the document proving my son's bodily fluids dropped to the ground with a thud. Linda, your son is really a dog? I smoothed my son's fur and sneered, absolutely genuine. The lawyer's face turned ashen instantly. She hurriedly picked up the document from the ground, her fingers trembling. How is this possible? The jury and audience who had been denouncing me earlier were completely bewildered, looking at each other. After all this, her son is a dog? No wonder she was so calm. We all misunderstood. Then the injuries on Daisy, and that DNA report. The crowd's gaze turned back to Karen and her daughter, no longer sympathetic but filled with inquiry and doubt. Seeing the scrutinizing looks, Karen and her daughter's faces looked worse than when Charlie appeared. I spoke timely, my voice not loud but every word clear. Daisy, you keep saying my son assaulted you. Now my son is here, a 2-year-old golden retriever. How could it cover your mouth? How could it drag you to the rooftop? How could it threaten you to take off your clothes? And that bodily fluid report, could the city hospital's report not even distinguish species? Daisy shook her head like a rattle, muttering nonstop, no, impossible, it's not like this. Brother Charlie isn't a dog, he's a person. A person. He really assaulted me. After reacting, Karen hid the guilt in her eyes and insisted that my son wasn't a dog. She pointed at the golden retriever in my arms and shrieked sharply, "You're lying. This isn't your son at all. Don't think you can fool everyone with a random dog, your son is a rapist." With Karen saying this, many people began to waver again. Right, what if this dog was temporarily brought by her? Exactly, who knows if she deliberately got a dog to act for exoneration? Maybe it's really a trick. Seeing people starting to doubt, Karen shouted even more excitedly, "Look at her, she's guilty. Her son must be a person, this dog is just something she used to exonerate that beast." Daisy also seemed to grasp the last straw, jumping up from her chair and screaming while pointing at the golden retriever. Yes. This definitely isn't Brother Charlie. Aunt Linda, you're too vicious. To shelter the one who really assaulted me, you actually brought a dog to impersonate him. You're a woman too, how can you do this to me? Aunt Linda, I beg you, just let Brother Charlie come out and confess. He's an 18-year-old adult, why dare to do it but not admit it? I just want him to confess and apologize, why is it so hard? Do you really have to drive me to death to be satisfied? Daisy cried and made a scene, her wails echoing throughout the courtroom. Even Daisy's defense lawyer stood up, forcing calm to try to salvage the situation. Your Honor, the defendant's action is pure sophistry, she could completely bring a dog temporarily to pretend it's her son. Then she turned to me and advised, Linda, at this point, no matter how you struggle, it's useless, your son committed a serious crime, punishable by up to 10 years under criminal law, and your sheltering crime could face up to 3 years. I advise you to have your son come out and confess soon, perhaps you can still seek leniency. She tried to pressure me with legal provisions, but her words lacked confidence. I smiled coldly, looking at Daisy's lawyer, and said word by word, Emily, nothing is set yet, and you're so eager to convict my son? As a lawyer, don't you know the law emphasizes a complete chain of evidence? As a lawyer, you must know that threatening and inducing me to confess when the evidence chain is insufficient. Where is your professional ethics? Eaten by a dog? Her face alternated between pale and flushed from my words, yet she didn't know how to refute me. I had checked on this Emily. Daisy's case was her first legal aid case, reportedly bringing her fame and resources if won. So, even suspecting that Daisy and her mother might be lying, she still chose to take the risk and proceed. Unfortunately, I don't swallow injustices silently. I ignored her and turned to the judge. The judge's gaze swept over me and Daisy's mother and daughter, then asked me, Defendant, can you prove that this golden retriever is your son Charlie? Karen stared at me intently, trying to see guilt and fear in my eyes, but mine held only calm and openness. I had anticipated this move, and my face showed no panic. Instead, I looked calmly at the judge, my voice strong and resolute. "Your Honor, I have evidence to prove that this golden retriever is my son Charlie." I took out the pet registration certificate from the small backpack my son carried, clearly showing its photo, chip number, and the name Charlie, with a registration date 2 years before we moved here. I also took out my phone and opened short videos. There were thousands of videos of my daily life with my son Charlie. From when it was just a month old and I brought it home, its first handshake, the first time it wrecked the house and I chased it around. Moreover, I provided my household registry, which clearly stated I was unmarried. With these evidences presented, Daisy and her mother's lies collapsed on their own. The jury cursed at the mother and daughter. "This is blatant slander. Using such a thing to falsely accuse a dog, have you no shame?" If Linda's son wasn't a dog, she couldn't wash away the accusation even by jumping into the Yellow River. Too terrifying, they have no regard for the law. And that damn lawyer, not even figuring out the truth and just joining in blindly, totally unfit to be a lawyer. The voices that originally attacked me now all turned against Karen, her daughter, and Emily. Karen slumped in her chair, still unable to believe the facts. "Linda, these are all fake, you must have forged them." I felt speechless. How could a person be so shameless? Daisy completely broke down, curling up in her chair shivering, muttering impossible. Emily's face was pale, full of dejection. She finally realized this was her first lawsuit, and also her last. Holding my dog's son who almost became a scapegoat, I contemptuously glanced over them and then said to the judge, "Your Honor, now the truth is clear, my son Charlie did not assault Daisy." The judge carefully reviewed the evidence and finally banged the gavel heavily. "After examination, it is found that the defendant Charlie did not commit assault on the plaintiff Daisy." The sound of the gavel falling gave me and my dog's son justice. Thinking of what Daisy's lawyer said earlier, "The law won't let any bad person go," I looked at her and said resoundingly, "Emily, the phrase 'the law won't let any bad person go' has a follow-up, nor will it wrong an innocent person." Upon hearing this, she lowered her head and never raised it again. Then I turned to Karen and Daisy. I said, "My son couldn't possibly assault your daughter, now do you believe it?" Karen was still shrewd. She immediately apologized to me. Maybe it was dark and my daughter misidentified, or perhaps just the same name, causing the misunderstanding. "Linda, you're magnanimous, can we just pretend this never happened?" Daisy also quickly cried and begged me, "Aunt Linda, sorry, it was all my mistake, you didn't suffer any real harm, so forgive us." The mother and daughter apologized convincingly, as if they weren't the ones aggressively trying to send me and my son to hell earlier. Watching their hypocritical act, I felt disgusted. However, they thought my silence meant tacit forgiveness. Karen pulled Daisy up to leave the courtroom. "Stop!" I shouted coldly, and the mother and daughter's steps halted. "Since your matter is resolved, now let's resolve mine. You slandered and defamed my son, and attempted to extort me, shouldn't you give me an explanation now?" Upon hearing this, Karen and Daisy turned abruptly. Karen forced calm, but her voice trembled uncontrollably. What do you want? Haven't we already apologized?" "Apology?" Holding the golden retriever in my arms, I stood up and walked step by step toward them, saying coldly, "If a light apology can solve it, what's the point of the law?" Daisy hid fearfully behind Karen, not daring to look me in the eye. I scoffed, "Now you know fear? Too late." As soon as I spoke, Daisy knelt before me, wailing, "Aunt Linda, I really misidentified. For the sake of being neighbors, forgive me this once, okay?" Seeing me unmoved, she tried to gain sympathy with her alleged assault experience. "As a girl, encountering this is miserable enough, how can you still force me like this? Aunt Linda, you're a woman too, you can understand my pain, right? How can you bear to rub salt in my wound?" She cried heart-wrenchingly, as aggrieved as could be. Seeing this, Karen echoed repeatedly, "Sister, Daisy, this child has a hard life. Since this happened, she hasn't slept well at night, always dazed, she's a victim too. Don't hold it against her, okay? If you agree, Daisy will recognize you as godmother and take care of you in old age." I was amused to anger by their words inverting right and wrong. Victims? Now you mother and daughter are the victims? Daisy, touch your conscience, are you really a victim? Were you really assaulted? As soon as I spoke, those who still sympathized with Daisy's experience were confused. What does that mean? So Daisy wasn't assaulted? This plot twist is too outrageous. Now, Karen and Daisy were completely panicked. Daisy's face lost all color instantly, her eyes dodging, not daring to meet anyone's gaze. Karen reflexively screamed in rebuttal, "What nonsense are you talking?" I directly presented the investigated materials. Actually, Daisy wasn't assaulted. On her 18th birthday, she went drinking with friends and ended up having relations with a boy she liked. Soon after, she discovered she was pregnant. The boy denied responsibility, so the mother and daughter started looking for someone to take the fall. That day, I happened to move in. They saw I was wealthy and had a son of similar age, so my son and I became the scapegoats. The truth of the assault was fully revealed, and Karen and Daisy broke down. "Bitch, you bitch. You dared to investigate us. You ruined me, I won't let you go." The mother and daughter shrieked at me in collapse, clawing and trying to pounce to tear me apart, but fortunately, they were restrained by court security. Looking at the deranged pair, I presented another surveillance video. It was the video of the mother and daughter extorting me for $1 million at my door that night. "Linda, my daughter was a pure virgin ruined by your son. Your family must compensate my daughter $1 million. Also, your son must marry my daughter grandly, with $880,000 dowry, a large apartment in the city center for the wedding house, and the latest Audi for the wedding car. If you don't agree, your son can wait to rot in prison, then you'll come begging me." In the video, Karen's arrogant voice clearly reached everyone's ears now, eliciting sighs. So shameless, fabricating such lies to pin on others. Their own loose private life, got pregnant and want a scapegoat, really refreshes my worldview. This is the real crooked upper beam and lower beam. Such people should rot in prison. The crowd was furious, and the mother and daughter became the target of all. I turned to the judge and said, "Your Honor, I request the court to pursue criminal liability against Karen and Daisy for false accusation and entrapment, as well as extortion." At this point, the judge banged the gavel again, his voice authoritative and firm. "Defendants Karen and Daisy, guilty of false accusation and entrapment, as well as extortion. The facts are clear, evidence conclusive, their actions constitute crimes. Sentenced to 5 years imprisonment and a fine of 100,000 yuan. The gavel fell again, and everything finally settled. Daisy couldn't handle the shock and fainted directly, miscarrying on the spot, while Karen was still cursing madly as bailiffs led her out of the courtroom. As for Emily, her professional license was revoked, completely ending her legal career. The moment I walked out of the court, sunlight shone on me and my dog's son, warm and comforting. This farce came to an end.